1. This happened about a year ago in Tucson, Arizona. It was my first time visiting Arizona, and I had no idea how many allegedly haunted places were in the small downtown area of Tucson. It was really exciting for me as someone who was basically born obsessed with the paranormal and with mysteries in general. I was there with 2 other females, a friend I traveled there with, and an acquaintance who lived there and was hosting us. It was our first night there, and the woman we were staying with took us out to see the city and have a few drinks. We visited a couple of supposedly haunted bars and did a quick round of karaoke before we started walking home. By this time our host was clearly pretty drunk, but my friend and I were very chill and clear-headed. The house we were staying at was located on the same street and just a couple blocks away from the oldest bar in Tucson. It was about 1:30 in the morning. We were talking and laughing, just enjoying the night. The streets weren't empty, but there wasn't very many people out. When we turned the corner onto her street, the bar was about 2 blocks ahead of us and was brightly lit. But the area we were currently in was fairly dark. I was kinda looking down when my friend said, you guys, don't freak out, but there's a guy in a cape walking towards us right now." I looked up and my stomach flipped. There was a man in a thick black hooded cloak heading in our direction. I instantly felt uncomfortable because he was moving with a slow, steady, very heavy gait. And he was walking down the very middle of the street, which seemed super odd. As soon as we noticed him, he began moving from the center of the road and veering off towards his left, as if he was intending to come upon the sidewalk and face us. My heart instantly began racing, and I pulled my friend closer to me. We kept walking but slowed down just a little, anticipating his move onto the sidewalk. There were cars lined up along the sidewalk, parked at a diagonal, and the man stepped between 2 cars in order to reach the sidewalk. But he didn't emerge. As we came closer to where he should have been, I was afraid he was going to jump out from between the cars at us. But he wasn't there. This would have been enough to totally freak me out, but at that moment I looked up and there he was, now nearly 20 feet ahead of us, walking down the middle of the street again. But this time walking away from us and towards the bar. At this point, I knew something very weird was going on, and I became absolutely fixated on him, like I wanted to study every little nuance of his movement, just trying to process WTF was even going on. I could see his black boots sticking out from the bottom hem of the cloak. It went all the way down to his ankles. I watched how the fabric swayed heavily with his lumbered steps. He looked huge and powerful. He looked just as solid and real as me or my friends or you. As he drew closer to the bar, he began again veering off toward the sidewalk and the entrance to the bar. The bar was on the same side of the street as us, and we were about 1 block away by this time. He stepped up onto the sidewalk and headed directly for the entrance. At this point, 2 women walked out of the bar and walked right past him. I mean, like practically brushed up against him, but never acknowledged his presence. They then stood outside just a foot or 2 away from him, talking and flipping their hair, never even glancing back once. They definitely did not see him. At this same instant, I noticed that he has stopped at the entrance to the bar. There is a really big super bright sign just about the entrance that glows the name of the bar, so he was perfectly illuminated now. With him standing there, I had a clear perspective of his height. He was taller than the top of the door. The tip of his hood was only a few inches below the bottom of the lit-up sign. He had his head slightly down, and I noticed that his feet seemed to be stuck mid-step. It was the strangest thing. It was like looking at a computer glitch. 1 foot was in front of the other, slightly raised up with the heel touching the ground, but he was just rocking back and forth like he was stuck in the motion of taking the step. Then our drunk friend, who noticed none of this, said something and I glanced in her direction. When I looked back at him a millisecond later, he was gone. We even went into the bar and there was nowhere he could have gone. They had CCTV cameras with the videos being displayed right there above the bar, but I was too shy to ask if they could check the footage of the guy. This experience has absolutely haunted me ever since. His presence didn't feel scary. I was afraid right at first when I thought it was some creepy man wandering the streets in a dark hooded cape. But when I realized it wasn't human, I felt calm and almost comforted by his energy. I couldn't stop talking about it afterwards and wondering what it was we saw. We passed by that bar several more times over the rest of our stay, and each time there was a person just standing there leaning up against a pole outside the bar, who either followed us for a block or tried to talk to us, and it just seemed odd. My friend strangely began kind of seeming to detach herself from me as the days progressed. We were roommates at the time, and when we got home from the trip, she dropped me off at our apartment and went straight to her boyfriend's house. And I didn't see her or hear from her for almost a week. It really felt like she was trying to avoid me. And I started spiraling into a deep depression. Within 4 months, our friendship had completely deteriorated in the worst way. We ended up moving out of the apartment that summer and are no longer friends at all. Although there are clear circumstances that led to this, and I take responsibility for my role in the breakup, I always wonder if that encounter in Arizona influenced any of it to happen, because when I look back it really seemed like there was some kind of turning point in the way she felt toward me after that. Just to be clear, ever since we stopped being friends, my life has been richer and more joyous and fulfilling than ever before. All these things in my life practically rearranged themselves when she and I began fighting, and now I'm genuinely happier and feel more loved and supported than I've ever felt. Whether or not that cloaked entity had anything to do with it, I'm very grateful to have had that experience. It's the most potent paranormal and mysterious experience I've had to date. Has anyone else seen anything like this before? Or has anyone had their lives changed dramatically after encountering a mysterious entity? Thanks for listening. 2. Okay, so this all began when my friend, M, moved into a new house south of town. The house was built sometime in the early 1900s, and has a very strange layout, especially the basement. M moved there during the summer, so all of our friends were free to hang out in the new house. It was a normal boys' night with us just screwing around and playing stupid games. At one point, around 2 in the morning, a few of us decided to play Ghost in the Graveyard in the extremely creepy basement. The others would not because they were saying they felt uneasy and got negative energy from the basement. So the game commenced with the ones who were willing to play. I was seeking first while I was searching. I had walked into a room and I instantly had a sick feeling in my gut. But I continued to walk deeper in. I bumped into a table and bruised my hip. So I didn't want to continue any further in fear of hurting myself in the scary darkness again. As I proceeded to turn around, I felt someone grab my calf and pull my leg back towards the back of the room. I jumped, whipped out my phone, turned my flashlight on, and shone it into the back of the room. No one in sight. I then heard a knocking, and I called to one of the boys upstairs to turn on the lights. The switch at the top of the stairs can control all lights downwards, and I then called out to everyone that they had to come out. I told them what happened, and all of them said they felt strange things as well. My friend C said that he felt someone touch his back, as if they were trying to get his attention. M said he was hearing someone whisper to him, but he didn't recognize the voice. The 2 others that were down there, T and W, were hiding in a closet together, and they both heard a third person breathing in the closet. We were all very spooked at this point and ran upstairs ASAP. We tell the others what had happened, and they all told us something that spooked us even more. My friend M has 3 big dogs that have no fear of anything whatsoever. Or so we thought. While we were playing our game, the dogs were growling at the basement door, and when there was a knock heard from upstairs, the dogs started to cry and retreat into the living room. After experiencing this, we decided it would be best to spend the rest of the night upstairs and away from the basement door. Fast forward to the next night. I'm home alone sitting in the living room with my dog, Abby. Abby and I were sitting on the floor in front of the TV watching whatever, and when I start telling my girlfriend about what happened, Abby gets up into her fighting stance. Try to imagine the cutest and beefy tricolor Aussie. and gets low, low, low to the ground. She begins to growl into the kitchen. Then all of a sudden we both hear a thud. Abby begins to cry and run behind me. I get up and walk into the kitchen to see nothing. Ever since then, I have not felt alone in my house when it's only me and my dog. It will sometimes feel very heavy, and it will get cold fast, randomly. And there's an occasional smell in the living room super late at night that was never there before. Sometimes when I'm in my room, I'll hear cracks in the hallway, like someone's walking through it. Or things from the room next to me which has nothing in it. But there's always that occasional dull thud in the middle of the night. And it's almost always followed up by the sound of Abby's pattering and whimpers coming closer to my door. But I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure it's Abby all the time. Mainly because I know she's not as heavy as the pattering sounds make it seem sometimes. And she sure as hell does not have the same deep breathing I hear from outside my door. 3. A bit of background on this. Generally speaking, I'm a skeptical person. When people ask me if I believe in ghosts or other paranormal stuff, I say no, because I feel like every piece of evidence I've seen will always have some kind of rational explanation at the end of the day. There is one thing, however, that makes me doubt my skepticism. One experience I had when I was still very young that to this day I can't quite explain. And honestly, if anyone here has any idea what it could have been, I'd love to hear your thoughts and perhaps finally put this memory to rest. Now, as I said, this was a long time ago, and I was a child, primary school age. Though I don't remember exactly what year. So it's entirely possible that I could have simply misinterpreted the whole event. But it scared me more than anything I can think of, and the memories I have are still very vivid. Anyway, to get to the actual story. Whilst I was in primary school, my parents were helping to run a weekly youth group that my church hosted every Wednesday after school. My mom until recently worked as a teaching assistant, and my dad helped out as a leader in various different church-run youth groups. And my family was very involved with this church, so it was quite natural for both of them to help out with organization and activities. I had 2 good friends from my year at school who had got into the habit of coming along to this group with me, and my parents were happy to give them a lift to and from the church every Wednesday. With my parents basically running the place and my 2 friends relying on them for transport, at the end of every get-together the lot of us often ended up hanging out for a good while afterwards, since my parents would stay to help clean and lock up. The 3 of us kids usually just used one of the big empty rooms to play in, and we occasionally got roped into helping my parents and other leaders tidy up. This evening was just like every other week. Myself and my 2 friends were just playing pretend in a now emptied room in the church, when one of my parents approached us and asked us to take some little plastic boxes of craft supplies back to the car, giving me the keys to unlock the doors and telling us to just sit in the car and wait, since they were almost done anyway. It was dark outside and quiet, but the street the church was on was a closed-off dead end with nothing but a handful of houses and a little car park for the church at the top end. So it was really nothing to worry about. Past the fence at the end of the road was a handful of old railway lines that hadn't been used in years, overgrown and completely abandoned, but that was it. We took the boxes and headed outside, not feeling any need to be cautious of the tiny dead-end street, and continued chatting and giggling as we crossed the road, heading towards the car park. The 3 of us were completely comfortable. Not a care in the world, so there was no way that what happened next was just a result of us being anxious or overthinking. As we approached the end of the road, facing the fence that separated the little street from the unused railway lines, all 3 of us were completely silenced mid-sentence, and stopped in our tracks by this loud, echoing groan that erupted from the direction of the fence. It sounded like an old man's voice, in some mixture of pain and tiredness. I can still hear it now, I think back on it. It was booming, too loud to just be a person standing down the road, and it echoed and reverberated right down the street, which was really unnatural, since this street wasn't really built up or empty enough to cause an echo like that, no matter how hard you yelled down it. There was a strange feeling that followed it, and I struggle to properly describe. like a tingling in the air combined with a ringing in my ears, almost like an electric feeling, though that could have just been the whole chill down the spine and blood running cold that some people talk about feeling when they get scared like this. Whilst the sound was still echoing, the three of us looked at each other for a split second, completely stunned into silence, before turning around and bolting straight back into the church, crying and screaming the whole way. We were hysterical for a long time afterwards. I vaguely remember my parents and some other leader trying desperately to calm us down or offer explanations as to what we heard. Suggestions I remember were that it might have just been the railway line setting, or probably someone just trying to scare kids away from their house. We refused to go to the car until my parents locked up and came with us, and the whole way we were terrified, expecting it to happen again. I've since been back to that street countless times, for more youth group meetings, obviously for church when we used to go there, and still occasionally now since my grandparents also live on that street. I've never heard the sound of anything even remotely like it since, and I still can't think of a proper explanation for what it was. I've asked my parents about it a couple times in the past, but they apparently don't really remember it happening, or assume it was just some childish overreaction they brushed aside. I've had a couple creepy experiences in my life, but this is the only one that I still can't quite explain away. 4. I'm a biologist for a zoo in the United States. I've been with this institution for about 5 years now. I won't disclose exactly which one. All I can say is that it's one of the major parks. I've been told stories from some of the senior staff and from security staff who I've known for years now, and I can say they are level-headed, rational individuals. I never paid much attention to these stories as I hadn't experienced any until recently, and I can say for certain that what I've experienced has no rational explanation. I'll start with some of the history of the park and some of the stories I've been told by the security staff. Then I'll move on and share my own experiences. One of the unusual occurrences described by the security staff is there is a lady that appears in the park in the middle of the night and begins to scream. They call her the Red Lady due to her red dress. Apparently, when they hear her scream now at night, they don't even bother to go check because of how often it occurs. As to her origins, I do have a few theories. A few decades ago, where the now existing tiger facility sits, there were bird aviaries. A lady had gone back behind them and shot herself, taking her own life. Now, as to the validity of that story, I can't verify it, as I have never been able to find any literature on it. But there is one that I can verify to be true. A few years ago, a call came over the radio from security, instructing us not to comment on the body that's being pulled from the lake. I had no idea what was going on, and I never heard them comment about it again to us, but saw it all over the news the next day. I should probably point out the zoo sits inside a large area of land that was originally set aside as a reservation for some Indian tribes. Apparently right outside the zoo in one of the surrounding lakes a human body had been found. The firefighters said that they, quote, weren't sure exactly how long the person had been in the water. As for who it was, or what happened, I'm not sure. The circumstances were really strange, and what made it even more weird is the lack of media coverage afterwards. No one ever talked about it again. And whenever I've mentioned it, no one seems to want to talk about it. Now on to my eye-opening experience. Some time ago, I was off-site doing a presentation on North American vipers late at night. My superior and I brought some vipers to the presentation in display cases. After the presentation, we were headed back to the zoo, and when we were on the back roads inside the park, we noticed one of our tires was flat, so we stopped. While my superior was assessing the tire, I noticed a toad crossing the road. I watched as the toad hopped along. That's when I looked across the road into a dense tree line. I immediately locked eyes with a woman who was peering at us from within the tree line. I couldn't see what she was wearing. All I could see was her face with the amount of foliage. She made no facial expressions or any gestures towards us. She just stood there, motionless, looking at me. This lasted for about 10 seconds. As my superior finished assessing the tire, he started to come around the side of the car. As he did that, this lady with inhuman speed darted sideways, disappearing into the tree line. She didn't turn and run like a normal person. She literally just moved sideways. There was only myself, my superior, and 2 security guards in the park at the time. And that I am certain of. As that happened, my heart skipped a beat. It was so fast. I don't think my superior saw it. I asked him if he saw that, and he just casually made a comment about the toad. He then instructed me to get back in the car, which I did. As we continued, though, I called for security to let them know what I had seen, but I got no answer. I called them repeatedly, until one finally answered. It's unlike them to not answer, but I brushed it off. They reassured me no one was inside the park except for us. After I put the animals back, me and my supervisor split up for the night. I was heading towards the back, and I, for the first time, heard the red lady scream with my own ears. It was a hysterical, banshee-like human scream. Clear as day, just up the trail. Very close. It was no animal. I called security and they immediately answered. They told me again not to worry, no one's in the park, and to have a good night. It all seemed too casual to me. 5. When I was a kid, my family moved to a small town in Illinois. I was 9 or 10 at the time. My parents were still looking to buy a house, so we rented for a while. The house we rented hadn't been updated since the 1970s. It had avocado green carpets and dated wallpaper with retro prints. It was an unsettling place to be. The living room was always cold. No matter how many lights I turned on, it always felt dark. Like the light was being sucked out of the room. Lights flickered and popped or glowed brightly for a few seconds as if they were about to burn out. The bathroom was the worst. The walls were covered in giant orange and pink daisies, and the fixtures had a too bright gold finish. Every time I went in there, I felt like I was being watched. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but I felt like there was something almost sexual about it, which to a kid my age was deeply upsetting. My mom and I used to have huge fights because I never wanted to take a shower. I remember her yelling, "This is crazy. A kid your age shouldn't be fighting me about taking a bath." I was so frustrated I couldn't explain it to her. I couldn't even explain it to myself. I remember one night I was trying to sleep. The bathroom was right across the hall. I started thinking about it, whatever it was, and I started to feel panicked. Just then I heard my door creak. I looked up and watched the door slowly glide open. I saw that sickening pink and orange wallpaper, and I felt my heart drop. There was nothing there, but it felt like there was. Some lean and hungry thing staring at me. I froze. After a moment, I flipped on the lamp by my table. I sprinted to my door, slammed it shut, and slid my dresser in front of it. After that, I slept on the sofa downstairs. I really thought things would get better once we were out of that house. And sure enough, one morning my dad made the announcement. We were moving to the house on 10th Street. I couldn't believe it. We'd never been rich, but that house was famously huge. It had 5 floors and an elevator. But my family brought East Coast money, and it just went a lot further in a farm town in the middle of nowhere. When I told my friend Jenny where I was moving, her face fell. "Oh," she said, "that house is haunted." "Really?" I asked. "By who?" "I don't know, but Chris Hewley lives across the street, and he told me he's seen 2 kids, a boy and a girl, looking out the window. And they're dressed in really old clothes. I went by there on Halloween, and it was all dark. All of a sudden, right as I'm walking by, all the lights come on all at once. And it's empty. It shouldn't even have the electricity turned on. I booked it out of there." I have to admit that I suspected Jenny was a little jealous. This house was huge. and her family didn't have much money, so I didn't blame her for feeling that way. Besides, I lived in a haunted house, but I'd never actually seen a ghost. I didn't really even believe in strong apparitions like that. There was a lot of renovating to do. The house had been converted into apartments with entrances on the outside. The elevator didn't really work, so my dad decided to rebuild the massive winding staircase that had once been the center of the house. My brother and I had rooms on the upper floors, so we would use the outside staircases to get in. The first day we moved in, Dad knocked a hole in the wall, and the construction began. A few nights later I heard the footsteps. It sounded like a line of people were walking up and down the stairs. I walked out of my bedroom and the sound stopped. There was no one there. It was completely gutted. Even if someone had been there, there was no place to walk. I heard it again a few nights later. I looked again. There was nothing to explain the noise. This house is 110 years old, I told myself. It's just settling. Soon I stopped checking. I would hear footsteps and ease my door closed. I started hearing voices. I would hear my mom call my name. Liz! Mom didn't like to have to call twice, so I dropped whatever I was doing and go looking for her. I'd search the whole house only to find that she wasn't calling for me. Sometimes after searching, I'd look out in the driveway and see that no one was home at all. Other times, I'd look up to see my mom standing in the doorway. Why won't you answer me? I've been calling you for 5 minutes. I didn't hear you. Either you're lying or you need to get your ears checked. But I wasn't lying. My mom would call, and I wouldn't hear anything but silence. I can't count how many times I would see shadows move out of the corner of my eye, look up and see that nothing was there. Things would go missing and I'd search for them for an hour, only to find them in their place. The first place I looked, in the downstairs living room, I could sometimes smell the odor of cigars. It was like someone was in the room smoking right beside me. It would give me a sinking feeling, and I would have to leave the room. Everything was easy to dismiss or explain away. It was like when you think you hear your cell phone ring. Then you look at it and see it's not ringing at all, just a sound in your head. I would think, the house is settling. I'm just tired. I'm so flaky. My book was right under my nose. Wow, cigar smells sure do hang around. But these things happen daily, sometimes hourly. I guess some things aren't true because you don't want them to be. One afternoon, I heard a yelp in the front dining room. It was my dad. He was doing some work in that room, and I thought he hurt himself, so I ran in. Are you okay? I asked. I was frantic, looking to see if there was blood. I saw a woman, he said. He seemed stunned. She had a long dress. She was just there for a second, Then his face cleared, and he seemed to come to himself. Liz, why don't you go outside for a bit? But Dad, what did you... Liz, go outside. I couldn't really say no. My dad was a deeply practical man, and he's a Christian. He believes, and I guess I agree with him, that you shouldn't mess around with things you aren't equipped to understand. So when I tried to ask him about it later, he wouldn't talk about it. Honey, he would say, I don't know what I saw. Leave it alone. One morning my mom and I were in the kitchen. She asked, Liz, do you ever feel anything weird in this house? Yeah, I said. I mean, sometimes. I told her everything that had been going on. I even told her about our old rental house. That house was weird. She shuddered. There was something dark in that place. I don't know if the stuff in this house is the same thing, so dark like that. But there's something strange here. Did I tell you that this place used to be a nursing home before it was turned into apartments? No, I said. I had no idea. I guess people have died here. She nodded. A lot of people, I imagine. And last night while I was sleeping, I felt something banging on the end of my bed. It was like they were pounding their fist on the corner of my bed. I don't know what this stuff is, but don't you talk to it. Don't even acknowledge it. If you do, it'll only get worse. A few nights later, I was sitting in bed. I looked up. There was a little girl standing in front of me. She wasn't very clear. She looked almost like the spots you get in your eyes after you step out of the sun. But her shape was clear, and she felt so real. I could tell she was looking at me. She wanted me to say something to her. I remember what my mom said. Don't you talk to it. Don't even acknowledge it. If you do, it'll only get worse. Those words rang in my ears like a prophecy, and I clamped my jaw shut. After what seemed like years, the girl turned, walked into my closet, and disappeared. I never saw another apparition after that, nor did anyone in my family. I still heard noises. A few odd things would happen, but they could all be easily explained away. We moved a couple of years later, and the new house was different. It was normal. I'll never forget the house on 10th Street. Its beauty, its mystery, and most of all, its many strange tenants. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 130. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. That last story actually gave me kind of chills while reading it. I don't know if it's the windy atmosphere or what. Or it might be the late night can of Relentless that I downed to keep me awake so I could record these. Don't judge, I have cut way back. But I got chills. Only thing I can definitely explain for sure in that, because it's something I encountered myself, is the smell of cigar smoke, although in my case, cigarette smoke. You see, my mother smoked. And even though she passed away in 2008, almost 11 years ago, I still occasionally smell cigarette smoke. Now bear in mind, in the living room. Now bear in mind, the carpets, the suite have all been cleaned with a cleaner. The wallpaper has been redone. If I painted the ceiling, I can't remember because I hate painting it, but I might have painted the ceiling. So, you know, everything's been redone, but I still occasionally smell cigarette smoke, so it does linger around. Although, I like to think if my mother is haunting me, she's just checking up on me, making sure I'm okay. Although it does make certain things quite awkward, like for example, when you live alone, there's no one around to judge you, so if you get out of the bath or the shower, you're not really in a rush to put clothes on, shall we say. I'm going to move quickly on from that image, but yeah, so that makes things quite awkward if that's the case. Although I suspect it's likely just the smell kind of permeating things and lingering around, even after they've been cleaned. Which reminds me, I'll have to borrow my sister's carpet cleaner again. Give the carpets and the sofa the once over. It's been a while. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.